What is going on, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing well. Now, today's video, as you can tell by the title, it's a different one. It's a special one. We're looking at r/BigBangRevenge. Do you know what that means, yeah? Revenge so mental, it was powerful enough to create the entire universe. So yeah, if you're excited, drop a like on the video. Let's try and hit 5,000 likes for BigBangRevenge, and let's get straight into the story. 10 years ago, I murdered my grandmother, and I've been celebrating it with my family ever since. I am now the only child from my parents, but this wasn't always the case. My dad is a spineless cuck that is dominated by my ruthless mother. When I was around 2 years old and living in Sweden, my dad went on a trip to Syria to visit my grandmother that used to live there, the one I ended up murdering, and stayed with her for 1 year because she had a tumor and had to get a few operations. During this year, he was a regular to a prostitute he fancied, and eventually he got her pregnant. After giving birth, she came to my grandmother's house and just dumped her daughter on him and left. She ghosted him and he couldn't find her anymore. My grandmother called my mother and all hell broke loose. My mother ordered him to throw my sister in the dumpster and pretend she wasn't alive because she was filth. My dad was very close to doing this, but somehow what's left of his fatherlyhood woke up for a second, and he didn't throw my sister away. He instead convinced my grandmother to keep her, and eventually she would take care of her when she grew up, technically just having her as a servant. This was the most humane solution that he could come up with. When I eventually grew up, I met my sister when I was visiting my grandmother, and we got really close. She even looked a lot like me, so I had no doubt she was my sister. But the way she was living was just awful. It broke my heart seeing how underfed she was. Her clothes were one rip away from being rags, and she wasn't allowed to use my grandmother's combs and stuff to fix her hair. I would collect any money I got and send it her way, but my grandmother eventually found out and started taking them for herself. My sister was never allowed to go to school and could only see a doctor when she became seriously ill. By the time she reached 14 years old, she admitted to me that she was thinking about killing herself because she just could not see any future for herself. My dad would just marry her to some trash family as soon as my grandmother died, and she'd be more like a commodity to be traded than a person. On the 13th of June 2008, my sister had a fight with my grandmother and was holding a little can of gasoline and saying that she was going to burn herself. My grandmother laughed and dared her to do it, which my sister did. My sister lived and died miserably. At first, my parents told me that it was an accident, but I overheard them talking about what happened in detail. By this point, my dad did not even care. I was disgusted with him and my mother. I dreamed a lot about just jumping on them and biting their freaking throats off and just watching them bleed in horror as I kicked their faces in. I wanted to hold his jaw from the inside with my hands and just rip it from his face. I eventually brooded and started going over the events. 3 guilty people, and I was planning on killing them all, as violently as possible. I could never come up with a plan regarding my parents, but I was already done with how to end my grandmother, the filth who made life miserable for my sister. In December of 2008, I booked a ticket to visit my grandmother and was supposed to return before New Year's to celebrate with my friends. I told my parents that my friend would pick me up from the airport and I was going to stay with him for a few days before coming back. I then called my friend and told him that I'm going to bang a girl that I met, and if my parents ever ask him about me, he would have to cover for me. Now, him being oblivious to what I was actually doing, agreed. So, I flew to Syria and stayed with my grandmother for about 2 weeks. When the day of my flight came, I packed my bags and told her that I was going to the airport. With disgust, I kissed her goodbye and then made as much noise as possible with my bags to make sure that the nosy neighbors saw me leave for the airport. I even called a taxi driver that lived nearby and he took me directly to the airport. I made sure he saw me go into the airport. I then stood at the check-in and took a selfie, but I didn't check in. I turned around and walked out. I took a cab to a nearby hotel and dropped my bag off in the room. I changed my clothes and then took another cab back to my grandmother's apartment. It was 2 a.m. at night and I was very quiet when I got up the stairs. I knocked on her door and she opened when she saw me through the hole. She was surprised to see me and was wondering about the flight. I told her it was delayed for a few hours, so I left the bags at check-in with the employees. She was tired, so she decided to get us some tea while I waited. As soon as she got up, I stood in front of her. She had this very confused look on her face due to my sudden reaction. I had not planned how to exactly do it, but I knew this was as good as it gets. Really quickly, I held her neck with my hands. My thumbs pressed on her throat very hard in case she tried to scream. She instantly got a horrified look on her face, and I just got really angry. She tried to speak, but couldn't make a single sound. At first, she tried hitting me, but my arms were longer than hers and she couldn't reach me. When I started applying pressure, she tried to scratch my arms instead, but I was wearing a thick sweater and also I was pumped with adrenaline. While strangling her, I became very angry. I was grinding my teeth so hard I almost broke them. I told her this is for my sister. I kept repeating my sister's name in a quiet, angry tone, but she couldn't hear me. She was panicking and her only concern was getting air. She then kind of just froze there. I kept squeezing even though she didn't move. I really wanted to make sure. I finally let go after a while, my hands cramping from all that tension, and I listened for a heartbeat. I sat then on the sofa, took a few breaths, and choked her again real hard for about 10 minutes. When I was sure she was dead, I started opening every drawer she had until I finally found her gold and money. I put them in a small bag and left. I closed the door behind me in case a neighbor found her too early. I walked for maybe a whole hour while my hands were shaking like crazy until I was finally far away and threw the bag with the money and gold in a small trash bucket that people had in front of their house. I took a taxi to the hotel and I remembered my sister and cried. I remembered my grandmother's face though, and I calmed down. I felt complete, like when a daunting task is finally over, a very soothing relief. That night, I slept like a freaking baby. I woke up the next morning and brought breakfast and booked a ticket back to Sweden the same day. I turned the TV on, put on some music. For the first time after my sister's death, I was truly happy. When I came back to Sweden, I took the bus back from the airport and later took the train to my friend's house. I told him that the girl dumped me and I was instead celebrating with him. My dad called me 2 days later and informed me that my grandmother was robbed and that the thief stole her valuables and killed her when she saw him. No one suspected a freaking thing. I acted surprised and made my way back. For a few months, I acted sad and secretly watched my family in case someone, got a wild theory. But they all seemed to believe the robbery part, since it's not that uncommon. The closest someone got was my uncle, when he mentioned how unfortunate it was that I left a day before this and that I could have saved her. My mother, though, called it lucky because I might have also gotten killed. I continued to pretend to be sad about it. Now, every year, my dad makes a ceremony to kind of remember my grandmother. They make dinner for family and friends and hope that the prayers reach her. They don't freaking know that this is a time of celebration for me. I am now married and I have 3 kids. The plan of killing my parents is cancelled due to them freaking themselves over so bad that it's more of a punishment, to be honest, if they stay alive. They are also not allowed near my children, as a punishment to how they treated my sister. Every year, I celebrate the ceremony of my grandmother's death by buying gifts for my wife and kids. My wife wonders why I do this, and I simply say that the way my grandmother passed made me realize how suddenly loved ones can disappear, and how this is my way of saying I love you. Okay. Well, my immediate reaction to that is shock. And just like, wow, a bit speechless, to be honest. Pretty crazy story. I mean, seriously, you can feel like the fire in OP's belly and the hatred that she has for her family and her grandmother throughout the entire story. And for that to live on with you for the next few months after your sister died, I mean, it's to be expected, isn't it? Your sister was pretty much, killed by your grandmother. Yes, obviously it wasn't physically like that, but, suicide is caused by lots of things. And in this case, it definitely was your grandmother, just not taking care of her. You can blame your dad for, having the child in the first place. You can blame the grandmother for treating the kid awfully. But ultimately, it's a combination of those things, really, isn't it? And the fact that your family are just clearly not brought up to raise kids that well. Not gonna lie. Guys, let me know in the comments down below though, do you think that OP went too far by murdering her grandmother? It's a tough one, isn't it? Because obviously the grandmother is at fault for her sister's death, which was so unnecessary. And I can understand the vengeance that OP must have felt and the need for revenge and justice and karma. But to go to that extent of strangling your own grandmother, Bit mental, isn't it? I'm not gonna lie. That's a bit of a mad one. But yeah, comment down below, guys. What do you reckon? Was it fair enough or maybe a little bit too far? My personal opinion, screw it. Your grandmother killed your sister. You can do what you want to her. I don't really care. That's my personal opinion, but that would get you locked up for quite a long time, to be fair. So maybe don't do that if you're in this situation. Hope you're not, though. Sounds pretty terrible. But yeah, let me know down below, what would you do? Anyway, guys, that is going to do it for this episode of Revenge. I really hope you enjoyed it. I'm trying to find, more and more crazy revenge stories on the internet. And to be honest, I'm branching out of Reddit. I'm just looking everywhere for the most mental revenge stories. If you've got any that you want me to narrate, let me know. Pretty cool stuff, eh? You guys seem to be loving them, and the likes and the comments and the interactions on the previous 2 or 3 revenge stories have been mental. So yeah, keep it coming if you enjoy the stories. And if you want to watch a few of them, then I'll put a couple on screen right now. If you haven't seen them yet, this one is mad. This one mad, but less mad. So it's up to you where you start. Anyway, guys, I will see you soon with a brand new video.